Because if we are so attached to a belief, that belief might be with us for 20, 30, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
If someone tells us that that belief is wrong and that they have evidence,
Yeah.
it's kind of like in the Matrix, take the blue pill or the red pill,
Yes.
I have
On the
evidence
happy
here.
pill.
Yeah, I have evidence here that your belief is wrong.
Yeah.
Some people will go, that's amazing. I can't wait to see this. This is like, it's paradigm shifting. It's amazing. Other people will go, no, 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 no. Because if you show
Actually,
me
I changed my mind. I don't think I would say that. I don't think I would say that I would take the red pill. If I'm honest, I probably would have been the guy that goes back in and says, it depends. So I'm happy to be wrong about good, positive things that I was previously feeling negative about. But if you're about to tell me that actually the truth is dystopian, then I don't want to know that truth.
well, who knows? Like who knows? And that's the thing. We can't see into the future either. Do you know what I mean? So when people are going, this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, I would automatically say, you can't say that, and I doubt your perspective is true, because if you can tell me you see into the future, then something's amiss. Especially without doing statistical likelihoods and model building on it. But the idea is, it's a simple one, is that if you say to someone, here's evidence that your belief is wrong, and you read that, and now you see, oh, I've been wrong, that requires you to change a mindset.
Yeah.
And that's tough, because imagine you have built your entire,
yes,
I was going to say life,
brand, even
not life, but an entire identity around a set of beliefs.
Yes.
And you find out something that's altering, that's life altering, that's how you engage life. And people don't want to do that because people don't like change. But to answer your question from before,
but also, sorry, can I just tell you, but could it be also because they're scared that they've wasted their life? So for example, I interviewed a lady who did a film about a group of people who are following a preacher in America who had predicted that the world would end in 2011. And if you've invested, quit your job, you've invested so much in that, you don't want to abandon that, because you had prepared that, life beyond 2011 was not worth living.
Yeah.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Not too bad, Sophia. How are you?
I'm great. Welcome to Ideology Podcast.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for having me.
So you've written a book on critical thinking, and you also have a blog where you talk about thinking about thinking. And so
right.
At a time when we don't know what to think, I thought you're the guy.
Yeah, well, I hope so. Like you were saying, I do have thoughts on thinking, and I've kind of made a career in psychology around exploring the ways in which we think, looking at years and years of research that we do have, why people think the way they do, why they use certain thinking mechanisms the way they do, and the conclusions that they draw from that, and what we can do to make that thinking better.
Well, honestly, you sound like exactly what we need. So to begin with, how should we think about critical thinking?
Well, that's a great question. Let's look at how we currently think about it, and the problem with that is that critical thinking has become a buzzword or a buzz phrase, I guess, over the past 10, maybe even 20 years. And the phrase has actually been around since around 1940. That's when it was kind of coined. And the processes involved in critical thinking go back to, Greek times, when we're looking at, old school philosophers kind of thing. But we've learned much more about it in terms of the birth of, say, cognitive psychology, and we can learn more about mental processes and what's actually going on in terms of why we draw the conclusions we do based on past experiences, based on emotions, based on beliefs, based on attitudes, based on all these things. But the problem is people have a belief that critical thinking is just something that is inherent and all people can do it when they're thinking about themselves. So we have this tendency to believe that we're always right.
Mhm.
And if you ask anyone off the street, are you good at critical thinking? We're not good at critical thinking. Do you think critically is a better way of saying it, because there's not really any such thing as good critical thinking. You're either doing it or you're not doing it. But if we asked anyone off the street if they think critically on a regular basis, most of them will say yes. And when asked if other people do, they'll say no.
Right.
And that's the problem, that we all believe that we're much better at things than we probably actually are.
Mm.
And that's problematic because people aren't willing to acknowledge that they might be wrong.
Mm.
So, like I said, I've made a career out of critical thinking, but I'll be the first to acknowledge that I will not think critically about every topic.
Right.
Oftentimes, it's not required. Like if you go to, I won't mention the chain, right? I won't mention the chain, but there was a coffee shop chain that used to boast 19,000 possible permutations of a coffee that you could get, or a beverage you could get when you went in. Now, a person doesn't go in and eliminate 18,999 coffees before they've decided on the perfect coffee. No, they go for the one that they're used to, they're usual, they're regular. Mine would be an Americano with 2 sugars and a bit of milk. I don't think about that, and I shouldn't have to think about that, because if I was to make very long, elaborate decisions and engage in decision-making processes around that all day long, I'd be absolutely fried by lunchtime. So it's not in my benefit to do so.
Hmm.
Sometimes I will make decisions based on how I feel about something, my experience on something, and we all do this, and that's our gut instinct. People
Mm-hmm.
will talk about intuition. It's a big thing in the business industry to go with your gut, go with
Mm-hmm.
your intuition. And I would actually argue the other way, that if you really care about our decisions, don't go with your gut,
Right.
because our gut, our intuition, our low-level processing, it's going to be right a majority of the time, but when it's wrong, it's going to be massively wrong.
Right.
And
So
so,
in place of intuition, then what do you suggest?
right. So the opposite of that is a reflective sensibility. Now, I don't want it to sound like this, kind of weird new age
Like
kind of way of
like
thinking.
being
And
a
it's
monk and going on a contemplative retreat before you reach
yeah,
out.
no, we don't need to go that far. Research from about 10 years ago showed that if we delay our decision making by even 1/10 of a second, we significantly increase the accuracy of that decision. So when I say reflective judgment, I'm saying take that gut response and say, hold on a minute, let's think for a minute, 2 minutes, or whatever is needed before we're confident in decision. And that taking that time is worth it if we
Right.
really care about the conclusion of that decision. I mean, arguably, the way in which we make our decisions has, changed a lot in terms of the internet and social media. Everything is very rapid. If we look at children and the way in which they kind of engage, even television shows, their own television shows. Years ago, you'd watch something on TV and their shows would be roughly 20 minutes long. And even
Yes.
those shows would be broken down into, different
Ads.
segments.
Yeah.
Now it's much shorter segments. Now it's little YouTube Kids videos, and that's all they can take. My 3-year-old, for example, now she doesn't have the attention span for say a
A
Bugs
whole
Bunny.
Peppa Pig episode.
Exactly. And so we're working on her with that. We're trying to help her with her, but this is the nature of the world we're living in right now, unfortunately. So what I'm saying to people is, if you care, take a few moments and consider the fact that your gut might be wrong. And I think
Yes.
that's the best way of looking at it. Is there's an old phrase, playing devil's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that with our own thinking, my gut tells me to do this, but let's take the other side. Maybe the other side is right. But again, no one really does that because they use their emotion, they use their beliefs, and they use their experiences, which ultimately might be wrong. There's actually a great book on this. It came out about 10 years ago. It was a bestseller. It was called Thinking Fast and Slow
Yeah.
by Daniel Kahneman. And he talks about this intuition, this kind of system one thinking, and how it's in opposition to what I'm saying is quite important for critical thinking, the system two, this reflective judgment. So it's if we think about it in terms of two separate types of thinking, and let's look at the latter, we might be better off with the outcomes that we achieve from our thinking.
Don't you think then the issue might be when you think of how our intuition is formed, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it that you've interacted with so many people at a certain age? Let's say you're 21. You should have potentially, if you go on how human beings used to be, interacted with a great number of people, experienced a great number of situations, threats you've had to overcome, challenges, and wins. But when you look at how our children are growing up, I don't even know that we'll be able to use that term intuition usefully, given that so much of the data they have is around things they've watched either on TikTok or shows, and a lot of their narratives are just fictional stories. They haven't had that data. If you grew up in a village, you can say, I based on my intuition, I think this and this and this. But it's the same thing. If I look at, let's say, what's happened with COVID and how our politics is, it makes sense to me because there are people like a generation, and so many of us now can actually say, for the last few years, I have had this very, a significantly reduced amount of social interactions that it's impaired my critical thinking, my intuition. Or should I not be thinking like that?
Well, I think when it comes down to most questions about psychology, you can answer any question in psychology with "it depends." And so my answer to you is it depends. So to kind of elaborate on what you're getting at, and a lot of it, I think you're on the money with a lot of it, is that what intuition really is your experience, as you address, but it's your belief systems as well. It's your emotions, it's your attitude towards things. So the way in which you engage any situation is going to be based on those things, just as another 21-year-old might come along and to the very same situation and conclude something different based on their experiences, their beliefs, their attitudes. And the fact of the matter is that you could have a room full of people and some event occur and everyone's going to have a different perspective on it. Are some going to be more similar than others? Absolutely. Those who are culturally similar, those who are similar in age, those who are same gender, those who have some kind of similarity are more likely to see it in a similar way. Doesn't mean that that's necessarily how it occurred in an objective way. So the problem is that when we're using intuition, we're putting the situation in a subjective lens.
Right.
And that's problematic because everyone's different. And when we think in psychology, we think in terms of research methods and statistics and the like. And one person's perspective doesn't really matter. If we want to learn the truth about something, we want to know how a majority of people feel. But then if it's a subjective lens, how certain can we be? And we can't be 100% certain, but we'll say, statistically speaking, a significant amount of people perceive this as this. And so we see a lot of constructs arising in society that are essentially just social constructs.
Yeah.
And it's fine. But at the end of the day, we want to forget about a lot of this if we're thinking critically. We want to remove that subjective lens and be as objective as possible. And that's what I'm saying, playing devil's advocate, because here I am, I'm sitting here and I'm 38 years old, I'm a white male, and I see things in a certain way, and I can't escape that. That's just, with that, there are certain ways that I grew up and certain experiences I had and certain beliefs, all of this, and it paints the world that I see. For me to think critically about anything, I have to forget about who I am, my perspective, my experience, because that can all be flawed. That can be all incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I need to do is I need to look at the research. I need to think about it in a very logical, emotionless perspective and say to myself, what is the likelihood that it's A, B, or C in terms of what the outcome is?
I hear what you're saying, but I had a different way of seeing this. In terms of, I'm 46 and I'm a woman. I grew up in Africa, and I always assumed that it is possible to understand pretty much any human being given the circumstances of their life. So, for example, if I'm going to meet somebody in Ireland, let's say in Belfast, I always assumed there is a commonality to our human experience that will allow me and almost pretty much every human to connect. And so what's confused me the most is that idea is now, which was, common sense, an accepted, a widely accepted idea that most human beings have empathy unless something's gone wrong mentally or in their development or the way they were nurtured. And so those people we could still understand once we knew what their backgrounds were. Mm-hmm. But now I think, to me, what I find complicated is precisely what you're saying, is yes, I have to forget about myself, but that's the part of me that thought that's empathy. I can't think that, a poor person who grew up orphaned and went through trauma like sexual abuse, I can't exactly relate to that, but as a human being, I should be able to put myself in that situation and see, okay, this is why they recoil from this, or this is why. Do we not all have that ability? Or for the most part, or majority of us?
Yeah, we all have the potential. Obviously there are certain, mental illnesses, mental disorders where, you're going to see a significant lack of empathy, or shall we even say emotional intelligence. But I think it's a dangerous thing to think in ways that empathy or emotional intelligence even is dichotomous. Either you have it or you don't. It's on a continuum. Some people might be very low in empathy. They still have empathy, but they're just not as empathetic as others might be. So you'll have people who are very empathetic, and they'll really put themselves out there for other people. So much so that it might become a character flaw for them in terms of detrimental to their own selves, where sometimes they get taken advantage of.
Yes.
So, empathy is very important, and it's a good thing to have, and it helps you in your relationships and in society and all that. But, it could be detrimental. On the other hand, it's detrimental to have zero empathy. You're not going to have solid relationships. You're not going to have solid friendships. Your relationship with your family might be strained, but the point I'm making is that there is a continuum of that. So the thing is,
each extreme develop a boundary? So let's say one of your patients comes to you and says, actually, you know what, I do find myself constantly putting myself in a situation where, as an empath, I am drawing people who take advantage of that. What would you say to them to treat them?
Well, I don't think it's something that needs to be treated per se, but I think it's one of those things where there's a certain social cognition. Again, how we think about our place in society and how we interact with people. So if a person is getting taken advantage of, you'd want to talk to them, about why they think they're being taken advantage. And I think that's kind of the first step is, why do they think this? Are they able to identify that maybe it is because, they feel too much for others, and when they are kind of emotionally manipulated, and that's what it is, they're being emotionally manipulated. Are they seeing that that's what's happening? If that truly is the case, maybe that it's not the case at all. But if that's the case, and then we just say, listen, just be a little bit more cautious. It's okay to feel. It's okay to feel empathy. It's okay to react in an emotionally appropriate way as you do. But if it comes down to, putting yourself in positions that are maladaptive, you'd want to be more cautious. You'd want to rethink that. But I think what you're kind of, making the point of earlier is, it seems that many people aren't particularly empathetic anymore, and that might be true. But there are a lot of things that can impact that, right? So we have something called, in psychology, we have theory of mind, which in a very simplified way is that, I'll take me, for example. I'm cognizant that I exist and I'm here and I'm a person and I have experiences and I have emotions and I am the center of my world because I'm not going to escape me. Unfortunately, some people don't recognize, as well as others, that people in their world are not just actors in their existence. They're not just there for their, life events. That other people also are individuals with their own thoughts, beliefs, and may not see the world the same way that, person zero does. And so when we recognize that other people have their own values, beliefs, goals, motivations, when we truly understand that, we respect the fact that they will act in accordance with those and not necessarily our wishes and will. This is part of emotional intelligence, about reading a situation. And emotional intelligence isn't, again, varying levels. People will have varying levels of this. And, what does that entail? It entails being able to read a situation, to see when a person is upset or could potentially be upset by something that's said or that something's done. And, empathy plays a large role in this, of course. If someone starts crying in front of you or is visibly upset, how do you react? How do you engage them? And, it's different for every situation. So, like, for me to say this is the appropriate thing to do every time, and that'd be inaccurate. Because, again, going back to that answer I gave you earlier, in terms of psychology, it depends. It's all contextually relevant. We have to take into account what's going on in the then and the there. But if you're able to recognize that people have feelings, that they have motivations, they have goals, and they can be different to yours, and that's okay, then you're getting there. That's what we want. That's a healthy way of looking at it.
It sounds so complicated, because if you take that perspective, you can see how we've come to the place we've come to, which is constantly, at war almost with each other. How is it best to think about things? If you say, do you think so, for example, if you're raising a child, you let them see and understand you are important to you and everybody is important to themselves. And so if you're trying to then life becomes, the best way to think about it is, then you have to be in almost negotiation with the other person and almost always exchanging what you want out of them for what they want. Is this a good balance to have?
Well, yeah, it is. But I think you kind of answered your own question there in a way, right? And it's very interesting the way you put it. You're saying it's kind of like a negotiation. And it's a relationship, right? But when we think about it, let's think about romantic relationships. What's the most important thing in a romantic relationship? And we often say communication.
Right.
Well, what's communication? Communication is, in many ways, a negotiation, isn't it? It's just a form of it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the slant that we want to put on the word. Negotiation, communication are much the same thing, but communication just seems a little healthier and wholesome, where negotiation might have a more, negative connotation, almost that it's business-like. But essentially what it is where, honey, how was your day? Well, my day was like this, and this happened, and this happened, and we say it in a way like, what do you think of that? And then it's like, oh, wow, that sounds like a hell of a day. Like, let me tell you about mine. And then we go back and forth, and we're interested in each other's day, of course, but we're trying to let someone know a little bit more about us and our day and how we're getting on and how we feel about things. Again, our goals and desires and all this, that's all being communicated. But it's in a way to see how our significant other reacts to that, how they feel about that.
Yeah. And
In
how
a way,
much
that's
of
an
all
issue.
this thinking, how much of all this thinking about thinking actually gets in the way of connection?
Oh,
Because that's
wow.
another huge problem for me.
That's a great question. So sometimes, because it's my gig, it's an occupational hazard. That's how I often find it. And sometimes, in a personal way, I'll be like, maybe over analyzing things because, like I said, it's an occupational hazard. And my wife will say, Chris, this is home time kind of thing, and
Mhm.
let's relax a little bit,
Yeah.
and that's very fair. But
Hmm.
then I will see her using it, and she'll overanalyze things,
Hmm.
and I was like, hold on, it's only a washing machine,
Hmm.
do you know? Um, and what she's doing is like she's researching the market, she's looking at prices, she's looking at specs. A new TV. We've been deliberating over a new TV, and we're not the type of people who would just go, I like that one. You
Yeah.
know, we
Because
want,
you want to make sure that that TV will last a few years and you're not going to have to constantly upgrade. Of course, yeah, there's a lot of thought that goes into it.
yeah,
But again, this comes down to, let's say, how much of all of this comes down to we have now lost the ability to think thought is this much, and now the rest is data and research itself. When you're researching something, some of it has to be how you connect with that thing. So for example, realizing, let's say in your case where you're buying the TV, what's most important to me is that it's a long lasting one as opposed to how it looks aesthetically in the living room. But for your wife, she might say, actually, I care more about how it looks in our living room. I don't care, in 3 years, I can get another one. And so your personalities will, it will depend on your personalities. And there's so much else that goes into every tiny thing, right?
absolutely, yeah. And the thing is, when you're doing it, it's great to have two people doing it, right?
Mm.
Because you actually have someone bouncing ideas off them. You have someone who can say, well, let's think about it this way, let's think about it that way.
Yeah.
That's great, and that's handy, right?
Yeah.
It's more difficult when it's you on your own because it's got to be you being both people.
Yes.
On the
Yeah.
other hand, when you have two people,
It's
let's
harder.
say it's not two people who love each other very much. Let's
Yes.
say it's people who barely know each other.
Yeah.
Then it gets a little bit heated.
Yeah.
And of course, as is human nature, we don't like to be wrong.
Yeah.
And even if we know we're wrong, even if we know we've been foiled, kind of thing, in our argument, we will look at for ways to get out of it, and we'll engage all these biases and heuristics and all these different mechanics of thoughts and argumentation to get out of it.
Yeah.
And we'll never admit, hey, maybe I'm wrong. People don't like to do that
Yeah.
anymore.
Is
And
it
they,
because we're
and I say
addicted to
anymore, but they
thinking?
never did. They never did. But what's changed now is that we have a lot more people from very different places, different backgrounds, different ideologies, different everything, especially online.
Yeah.
and they're able to engage one another. And here we are thinking this is going to be a wonderful, great idea for sharing ideas and this, that, and the other. And it is when you get people who are willing to engage critical thought to do that, who value the truth and don't care about being wrong or right, just as long as collectively you get the right answer. People don't do that anymore. And then social media, like, and I don't want to be sounding like I'm anti social media, I'm anti-internet. I'm not. I mean, when we think about all the great things both have done for us, it's fantastic. But again, we don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years. We don't know what it's going to look like in 20 years. We don't even know if it's going to be around in 10, 20 years. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a very new thing. And I think when you look at, you brought up 21-year-olds before, they're native to this kind of digital culture where it's very new to anyone who's a bit older than that. I was in my 20s when the first social media came out, and that's less than 20 years ago, kind of thing. And here we are doing this. But the way in which it can be used, it's scary. I was having a conversation now with a colleague of mine last week, and we were talking about U.S. politics. I grew up in New York, and this person did too. And we were talking about it. I said, is it me? Maybe I'm misremembering, but I remembered years ago that in terms of political parties, it wasn't so divided, that people generally just voted, people were part of parties, of course, but they typically voted for the people who they liked.
Yeah.
And if they didn't like the candidate from their party, they might just not vote. That was kind of their thing. But now it seems that everyone is very extreme. There's no in the middle. And you had a lot of people who were in the middle back in the day.
Yeah.
And I said, am I misremembering this, or am I exaggerating this? And they made the point, they go, I think social media exaggerates it a bit. And the reason why social media exaggerates it a bit is because it's selling you something. When we think about advertising and engagement and all these things that under the bonnet.
Yes, you have so much more that can keep you going. It's so true, actually, because if you are having an argument or a discussion, after a while, within like 10 minutes, once we see this, if you're having an argument, an in-person argument and a difference of opinion, you kind of, after a while, you see the other person has really entrenched views. In fact, you'll be able to detect it right from the beginning. So, for example, if I'm talking to somebody and they were either a vaccine skeptic or they were pro, and I could see both had super entrenched views, if you've had enough experience with human beings, you should be able to know, okay, this person is in this state of mind right now, and no amount of talking is going to get you any further. It's the same in a relationship. It's the same even with your child. Sometimes you can tell, what, this is not the time to do this. But on social media, you don't know. You're addicted. There's an addiction to it, and I think that's what we're all missing, is that this device that we cannot put down has taken over our lives to such an extent that we lack space and clarity.
Absolutely, yeah. So what you're describing there is, when we're what I call the real world, when we're out in the real world, there are social cues there for us to pick up on. Yeah. And, you might say to yourself, right, I'm in the wrong conversation with the wrong person at the wrong time.
Yes.
And to be honest with you, that's intuition. And intuition is doing its job. And like I said, most of the time intuition is great and it helps us. And this is one of those cases. And then you say, right, you know what? I think I might go now. Nice meeting you. Take care of yourself. Goodbye. And then off you go with your day. And then you might go, wow, I'm glad I got out of that conversation. Yeah. Where when you're in social media and say you're in a thread of argument, the other thing that's really tough about it is having the last word. So people don't want to leave it, if they are in an argument and having the other person having the last word. It's almost like conceding. It's almost like they won. It's almost like, because it's up there for the public to see, it's a public loss. And people don't want that either. So
Right.
they'll keep engaging. But the other thing, and this is the more kind of insidious way of looking at things, right? If you think about the echo chambers that you create on your social media,
Yeah.
like say for instance, if you're on Instagram and you search for a few different types of profiles, right? It will obviously start predicting what you're interested in. So when you
Mhm.
go to search, before you even type anything in, there's actually
Yes.
just a slew of profiles that come up, and you scroll through them because you're like, oh wow, that actually looks kind of relevant.
Yeah.
So this is not a secret. We know this is the case, but we almost forget about it because it's just like, oh, it's not a big deal. I'm here looking this, that, and the other. But it shapes the way we think. So if we look at, like, say, Facebook, for instance, you know, Facebook knows our tendencies. It knows what we like. It knows what we share.
Hmm.
So if it comes down to politics, if we like something, we read something and we like something, it knows that we've read it, which means we're interested in it.
Yeah.
Can you imagine someone has actually clicked into something and read it? My word, that takes a lot, and then they liked it. Okay, this is what they like. But they click into this and they didn't like it. In fact, they hated it. They're very
Yeah.
angry.
Yeah.
So Facebook can manipulate you in a way where it will show you only the things that you love and only the things that you really don't. You hate this stuff. And so what it does, it shows you both. Not just what, a lot of people be like, oh, it keeps showing me what I want. No, 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 it shows you both because it's the
Yeah.
same kind of emotional reaction. It'll still get you to engage. It'll still get you to read. And that's
Yeah.
all they want. They want to create love. They want to create outrage. What they don't want is you to be indifferent. They don't want you
Right.
to be like, eh. Because
Yeah.
if you go, you're not going to like it. You're not
But
going
the
to read
problem is now the media has become like that. And
it.
so our most trusted source has been conditioned to become exactly like the social media algorithms. I think I was talking to one of my brothers recently, and he said, isn't it crazy how so-called journalists now will craft entire articles based on what troll said what?
Yeah.
They'll pick out 3, 4 trolls and then have to craft a whole argument or a whole article based on this is what the troll said. And so we're wasting so much time reading all of that, trying to glean information. And because they have our trust from years and years of of when they were doing actual important stuff, we maybe haven't mentally caught up to the new landscape.
Yeah. Yeah, well, like, I mean, if you look at the media, I think you're always going to have a situation where you had credible journalism, and I still think there is credible journalism out there. And there is, there's charting of it to see what are the most credible and objective in the way things are reported. There are reports out there on there. And you always had the type that were very sensationalist, and their headlines are attention grabbing because they want to sell papers, they want to get viewers, what have you. But if you're seeing a larger divide and less of the credible and more of the sensational now, like, it's sad, but I think there's an element of, well, we only have ourselves to blame in a way, because we're the ones who are buying in or not buying in.
But isn't it harder to put that fully on us? Because I think to myself, I love watching a reasoned discussion, right? I feel so much calmer, I feel informed, I have clarity, I know what the issues are. But because you're shown what you should be scared of more, of course, if they know, they know how our brains are wired. Um, how much of it is on us, and how much of it is really the responsibility of people who have seized our weaknesses?
Yeah, and you know what? And you're right. But it comes down to the idea that you're this one person. You're this
Yeah.
one person who prefers a well-reasoned, calm, intellectual conversation.
Hmm.
And I would like to think I'm much the same myself. And I
Right.
know many people who are like that. But unfortunately, that may not be the statistical majority.
No, but don't get me wrong. Like, what I mean by that is, of course, there's parts of us that love the entertainment. I watch, I watch a lot of reality television. But my point is, when I'm tuning in to watch something that's just, an escapist thing, I know where to place that. What's annoying is tuning into a news channel. I haven't come there to be entertained.
Yeah. 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 No, I think, yeah, I think you're, I really like that. I really like the way you're putting it. I think it was, do you know Bill Maher, in America? He is,
Yeah.
yeah. He said something one time, which kind of stuck with me, which reminds me of that. Because we're not getting the news, we're getting a narrative.
Yes, exactly.
And
And so
and, and,
that's
and
the
there's an
point
element to
that
that.
when we
Now,
come back, I really
yeah,
want us to talk about that. I want us to talk about that aspect, which is what should we develop in ourselves so that we are not being hijacked, so that we are not losing our faculties to actually sense, because this is harming us in some ways, right? When you're constantly being hijacked in this way and you don't really know, actually, should I take the vaccine? Should I protect myself in this way from COVID? But it's all theater.
mm,
That's harmful, right? So,
it is. But the unfortunate thing is that that's what gets people to respond. Like, there's two main ways, in light of the research I've done, there's two main ways in which people think about information. They think about it in a hierarchical manner. And
right.
what I mean by that is they see something and they classify it, categorize it, stereotype it. They what we call it constructing a schema, which is a
Mm-hmm.
mental framework for how we interpret the world. And you were kind of talking about this before as well, is that when you take one person, they're unique, they're special, they're this incredible, complex person.
Yeah.
And then you don't realize that until you put another person next to them. And
Mm-hmm.
then you see how different they are.
Yeah.
But you add another 10, you add another 20, you add another 100, you add another 1,000. And you start seeing that no one's special. No one's really that complex. And you see that people generally have the same patterns of how they work
Right.
in terms of the way they're thinking. So when I say something in terms of like, well, research shows, that's why I always talk about the importance of research, because it's conducted in a very objective, specified way with specified numbers of people, enough people where we can actually see patterns. And what we say is we can generalize to a certain extent because we have so many people that we can see these patterns. When you have less people, one, two, three, it's not easy to see a pattern, and you can't generalize from
Yeah.
one, two, or three. So that's why I always say to people that if you're going based exclusively on your experience of something, there's a very good chance that you're going to get it completely wrong,
Yes.
because you might be one of the 2% or 3% or 4% who think this way, as opposed to the 97% who are showing us this overarching pattern of human thought. But in terms of getting back to the animals, I guess you might say cat and I might
Mm-hmm.
say dog, and we both be right, but we know they're different animals. So
Yes.
so we have to differentiate them further. We have to categorize them further. One has whiskers, one likes to bark.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is we're forming a category, and then we're further classifying that, and we keep doing that and doing that, and that's how we build meaning around the world. That's one way we do it. The other way we do it is we create a story. We tell a story from start to finish. And stories can be very long and elaborate, and they can be very short. I can tell you a story, he ran. That is a story. It's about a guy who ran, and it's not very entertaining. But if it was the news, shall we say, that might be very important, for whatever reason, a very short one like that. But is anyone really interested? No, because it's short and it's boring, but it tells me exactly what happened. And that's all I really want from the news. Yeah, but it's not going to engage you.
Right.
What will be more engaging? Well, he ran furiously. He ran with passion.
Yeah.
And we add and we add and we add to it to make it more compelling. And then to make it even more compelling, we add our own interpretation to what we think might be at work here. And, you might see this, in an editorial where people will just take a piece of news, something boring, and the remainder of the piece is their opinion on it. Now, a lot of people like to read that because it's a very human perspective on some objective thing that happened. And arguably it's more entertaining. And you address that. I don't want to be entertained. I just want the news.
Yeah.
But the issue is, are you one of the few who feel that way? Now, I'm playing devil's advocate a lot too. I am massively playing devil's advocate, and it's almost like I'm standing up for the news. I'll be honest with you. I don't listen to the news. I don't watch
a lot of people have switched off, but have you always felt that way?
No, I've not. No. I started doing that in around the recession.
2008?
2000. Well, I started didn't probably not until around 2009, 2010, because I started seeing the effects, because obviously all the news was very depressing. All they were talking about was the recession.
Yeah.
And I think, an important thing, especially from a psychological standpoint, is, you've got to think about your own well-being as well, right? Your own, what's going on up here. And I said, this is not helpful to me. And if there's important news, like we have to evacuate the city or something like that, I'll hear about it. I'm not going to have to depend on RTE, CNN, or BBC for this. Okay. I'm going to find out what's important. And I found that, I was starting my day a lot better, not having news on. I used to have news talk on the radio on my drive into work. I stopped doing that. I started putting on classical music, and that I didn't grow up with classical music, but I found that it was really soothing on the way in. And I listened to rock. I listened to rock on the way home. It's just that
to give you that extra energy.
Yeah, different things at different times of the day. I wanted a slow, phased in, ride into work with the classical, and when the work is done for the day, I can let my hair down and relax and do the things I enjoy, and
So
the news
the
was never a part of
it. So then the question becomes, how much of, if we had to have two different people, the person who's growing up in a village somewhere, and they're not, they're not waking up listening to the news and then coming back to 3 hours of Netflix and reading a book at university all day, and that's really how they lived their 20 years. Would you say that person has impaired critical thinking versus the person who maybe lives in a small village? He's surrounded by people, the milkman, the vegetable selling lady, the farmer, and his entire day, he might be building up narratives about humans, but it's based on so much else. So it's based on what the village lady told him she was going through with her husband, the shortage, the failure of the crops. That person accrues, I think, a lot more useful and a developed critical thinking. What do you think?
My honest answer is I don't know.
Right.
And that's an important answer, okay? Because number one, it's good to say I don't know.
Okay.
And the reason why I say I don't know is because I don't have access to research on that. Okay? So I have no credible evidence to give you an answer, right?
Right.
However, I do have an opinion.
Yeah.
And I will give you my opinion, but I'm going to preface my opinion by telling you it is an opinion and not based on evidence.
Okay.
And that is another issue that we see in the realm of critical thinking. Everyone is very happy to tell you their opinion. And everyone is very happy to tell you or to treat their opinion like it is fact, like it is based in research, when it's not necessarily. what I do know about critical thinking can be applied here, and that's simply the case that the person who grows up with more connections, more access to things, they have greater potential for critical thought.
Right.
There's a chance that if they went to uni, that they took maybe half a semester of critical thinking, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
They have greater understanding that there is something that is researched, whether or not they know anything about that. There is greater potential. Does that mean, though, that they are necessarily going to engage the resources that they need to think critically? No.
Mm.
There's nothing to say that that person who, grows up in a tiny little village, if they're very, very, very intelligent, but they've never had like formal education or anything like that, they'll still be able to
let's say
process.
they have had the same formal education. It's just that they've had just that education and they've missed out on the endless reading of fiction and movies and that type of condition. So, for example, their experience of romantic relationships will not be based on what you've been taught to think of romantic relationships. So those of us who grew up on media, having watched The Notebook and Bollywood movies and all this type, will think a certain way and have expectations of relationships, for example, that make actually having a relationship in the modern day so much more difficult, right? Whereas if this person, all they saw was the way people interacted with each other, the way they showed affection in the actual world, they're, in my opinion, I feel like they're more likely to have more successful relationships because they're not thinking about everything and being analytical to that extent. They just kind of almost are in the present, making decisions only in the present.
Well, let's pretend they're both the same age.
Okay.
Let's say they're both 22 years old. They both have 22 years of experience. It doesn't matter what the experience is of.
Yes. Okay.
It's still experience. And regardless of what little or how much experience you have, there's still the tendency to pull from it. What makes it incorrect or correct from a critical thinking standpoint is how they're able to recognize the level of uncertainty associated with experience. Now, I did a study a few years ago, really interesting one. What we did was we ran a critical thinking course with a group of 18, 19-year-olds and a group of mature students where the average age was 44 and a half. And what we did was we tested their critical thinking beforehand and after the course. Who do you think performed better before the course? And let me clarify, none of the students had ever taken a critical thinking course before, so they had no real basis for it. Who performed better, 18 and 19-year-olds or 44-year-olds?
Of course, a 44-year-old.
Absolutely not. The 18 to 19-year-olds did significantly better. Significantly better.
How?
And why was that the case? The problem was that the 44-year-olds were relying on their life experience. And the problem is that you can have a lot of experience, but you might have a lot of experience doing the wrong thing.
Wow. Right.
So
what kind of things, for example, give us examples of the type of thing that you would be asked to judge your critical thinking?
Yeah, so this is this is another tough one. So anyone in the realm of critical thinking research will tell you it's very difficult to develop assessments for this because it's a lot of the researchers kind of disagree with very minute details about what critical thinking is exactly. And the way I look at it is critical thinking is you have skills. It's a certain skill set: analysis, evaluation, and inference, right? And they are the best skills to have for critical thinking. But if you are not willing, inclined, motivated, if you don't have the disposition to apply them, you probably won't. So on the other hand, you need a positive disposition towards critical thinking. And that's very important. You must evaluate. You must want to use it. You must believe that it is the most crucial element of helping you attain the truth. Now, you can have this wonderful disposition, but if you don't have the skills to actually do the critical thinking, you're not going to do it. So you need the two of these together.
Right.
And they're governed by this idea of what I was saying earlier, reflective judgment, that willingness to accept that you might be wrong. And so we take that step back, we take that few extra moments, few extra minutes, few extra hours, few extra days to make that decision.
So are you saying,
yeah.
Are you saying then that, for example, the way you would judge it is, let's say you give a scenario, this thing is about to happen, and there's about to be an incident that's going down, and we think this person is about to drop off a bag. What would you do? And so maybe somebody like me, who's a 44-year-old, thinks, oh, there must be drugs in that. Whereas the child might actually, who is not conditioned in that way, might think at it at so many different, they'd have different possibilities that they come to, and that's what makes them okay.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I'll give you one of my favorite ones, because it's short and it's simple and it's to the point. And to be honest with you, it won't require days of thinking. It just requires a couple moments. Like I said, that holding back for a tenth of a second or so, and just kind of giving yourself that extra second. Okay. One of my favorites is that your child comes home with a memo from school.
Do they come home with what? Sorry.
A memo, a letter from school.
Yeah.
And we have been made aware that there has been some what's the wording? The wording, of course, is important. There's been some concern-causing behavior at the school. Threatening behavior is not allowed at the school, and if any threatening behavior is observed, the student will be expelled immediately. You as a parent are then asked, would you sign yes, I agree to this letter, or no, I don't agree with this letter? And why?
Again, my conditioning would be, because I've been brought up to think teacher is best and they know better. And so my inclination always was to think, okay, what did my child do? And, spare the rod, spoil the child. And so I grew up with that mindset. And so I would think I would agree with the school, because I would fear raising a spoiled child who then needs a lot of discipline. But again, I know that it's my culture, everything is about making sure that you raise your child right, so that you're not raising them your entire life.
Yeah. Now, what I like about the way you answer that is you say, I know this is how I would answer and why I would answer. And it's almost like saying that you're preempting that it's the wrong answer.
It could be, yeah.
Why do you think it could be the wrong answer?
Because I have to be open. I don't know yet. I'm still kind of gathering what the facts are, It could be that my child did this thing, and so my initial reaction is to jump to the defense of the school and the teacher. But experience has taught me that actually they're not always right. So, but I had to learn that the hard way.
Okay. So you're doing this thing that all human beings do. I was telling you about how people think in hierarchies before, and we were talking about the cats and dogs. And then I was saying how people think in stories. We like stories. We like a narrative. It helps us to make sense of something. I gave you a very brief example, okay? And it was the bones of the story. I did not tell you very much because there wasn't very much to the letter.
Yes.
So what you did was you put flesh on the bones of the story, and you're like, what did my child do? What was my upbringing like? I believe this, I believe that, I believe this, I do, and you said a number of things, and I say to myself, Well, that letter didn't say anything about that. So
Right.
you're rewriting the story
Yes.
the way you think it should be, or
Yeah.
what you think is getting there. Let me tell you something, right? I agree with a lot of the things you said. So if we're coming at it from my beliefs and my perspectives, I'm with you. I'm with you on
Right.
that as well. But I'm going to put my beliefs, my
Aside.
feelings, and all of that aside, and read the paper, read the newsletter for what it says, and I see threatening behavior, and I
Okay.
say, I say, what do they mean by threatening behavior? They have not defined for me what threatening behavior is, or what they alluded to this idea of cause concerning behavior. What does this mean? Why can't they give us a concrete example of what happened? So in your case, you're like, what did my kid do? Who's to say it was your kid? What are they talking about? They didn't tell us what they're talking about.
Right.
So without them defining what they mean by threatening behavior, I'm not going to sign this, because I don't, because if it's the case that your kid goes into school the next day with a hat on backwards, and they've now decided that this is threatening behavior, and then they get
Right.
expelled for wearing a hat backwards.
Yeah. But it's exactly that kind of thing that once that, don't you think then your critical thinking is only developed through lots and lots of interactions? Is there a way to develop it without having lots of negative and positive interactions?
Oh, well, I always think that a training course in it is very useful. I think, if you had, maybe an hour a week or 2 hours a week for 8 to 12 weeks or whatever, and it's really, I'll be honest with you, that's kind of it's a first world issue, isn't it? This is something that we think about in terms of, you're likely to get this at uni or in some kind of third level education. With that, there's online courses that are free out there that I'm aware of, and some are better than others, but at the end of the day, something's better than nothing. It's one of those things that if you wanted to practice it and you wanted to think about it for yourself, and you don't have the time for a course, and you're not going to sit through a course, and that's fully acceptable. There's very easy kind of ways that we can do, or practice critical thinking and practice engaging it in our lives. And the funny thing is that I do say a lot of, experience can be bad. Like, and I'm not saying it's always bad, because like I said, 90% of the time, we'll say, for the sake of argument, our gut, our experience, our feelings will tell us the right thing. But when they're wrong, the few times they are, we get it massively wrong.
It
We don't
could
want to
be
do that.
life-altering
Yeah,
mistake,
when we
right?
care about our decisions, we don't want to be taking that chance. So the thing is, I would say to people, if you're concerned about it, recognize that there is an uncertainty to absolutely everything. Recognize that you are not necessarily right. Recognize that you need to take time and not jump towards a conclusion.
Right. What are the places do you think that critical thinking is most applicable? So, for example, do you think people who have less developed critical thinking are the people who make these catastrophic mistakes in their life? For example, they marry the wrong person, or end up having a child with the wrong person, like those life-altering decisions.
Yeah, like, I mean, so critical thinking can be teased out in very different ways. I was telling you before that, there's a set of skills for it. We don't have to use, situations that require critical thinking don't always require each and every one of those skills. We can pull things out from it as we need it. We can pull out, problem solving. You might just use that aspect. You might just pull out judging a likelihood or an uncertainty. You're running basic percentages and statistics. You pull bits and pieces as you need them. I think it's a matter of being able to navigate that for the situation you needed. So you said picking the right person, like, you decide you're going to marry someone, and obviously you don't want it to end, and you love this person now, hence the marriage, and you're going to lose a lot of money if you wind up getting divorced, but the divorce rates are quite high. What is it? Roughly 50-50, One of the mistakes that people make going into marriage is believing that their situation is better than someone else's.
What do you mean? Sorry.
So, like, the thing is, for us to say, I'm getting married and it's going to last forever.
Yes.
But you also acknowledge that it's a 50-50.
Yeah.
Believing that you're going to be different for some X, Y, or Z reason, I don't know. Why would you think that? But then you can say to yourself, right, well, let's break it down. When am I getting married? What age am I getting married? Am I getting married at 17 where, I don't, I'm not fully mature yet. I'm not cognitively developed to, the level I'm at. Arguably, I'm still a kid. My mother and father tell me I'm still a kid, and I tell them, no, I'm an adult. I can do this. You might want to decide that maybe I should listen to them. Or maybe say, no, you know what? I really love this person, and I am sure that they love me. And of course, emotion gets involved there. What we really need to do is we need to look at the statistics of who's most likely to get divorced. Are my odds any different based on how old I am, what stage of life I'm at, what I do for a living, what my partner does for a living? You have to take into account all these contextual things. And, no one's asking you to sit down and read research papers about this, but what we are saying is understand the reality specific onto your situation as best you can. Of course, no one gets married thinking they're going to get divorced. So, a lot of these things do throw curveballs at us. And what's even worse is, you may be taking care of everything to the best of your ability, but you're also trying to account for a separate entity, your partner.
Yeah.
So you can't control what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're doing. You're essentially going to bet that they are going to stay in the same mindset that you are for the rest of their life.
And do we tend to, as human beings, do we tend to, because there are people who say, look, we don't really change. I think there was a documentary that was done to show that who you are at 7 pretty much turned out to be who you were. So what is the likelihood that you meet someone in their 20s, they'll likely have the same values at 40, 60, or as they go through life?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay. So there's a lot of research out there that is similar to that, and there's a lot of ways we can look at that research. There's research that suggests that personality, for the sake of argument, doesn't really change, right? But I'll tell you something about personality, my perspective on personality, and you'll have psychologists out there who agree with me and psychologists out there who disagree with me. Okay. I don't really believe personality exists. Okay. I believe personality is essentially labels that we put on something we call response tendencies. So let's take the introverted versus introverted and extroverted, continuum there, right?
Mm-hmm.
People will say, because I'm on your show and I'm talking and I'm happy to talk, and because I teach and I'm up in front of the room, and because
you would say you're extroverted.
A lot of people would say I'm extroverted, but to be honest with you, what I prefer most doing is being in quiet, isolated settings, reading, watching television, hanging out with my family, and I have a small family and it's big enough for me, and it's good. I'm happy with that. But what happened was, in my life, I found that being extroverted has afforded me certain positive outcomes.
Right.
Because I'm happy with these positive outcomes, I associate those outcomes with acting extroverted.
Right.
So what it is I'm put in a situation, and my tendency, my response tendency, how I act, is in an extroverted fashion.
You adapt it. You adapt yourself to those settings. But
so I may
who are you then at your core?
but that's it. I think it's wrong to say someone is introverted or extroverted. I think, and in all honesty, most personality theorists do agree that that you're somewhere on a continuum.
Yes. Okay.
And I do agree with that. But why do we need labeling? Why do people need to take personality tests? And what good are they for? What people are really doing is they are acting in a way that will yield the most positive benefit for them, whether they recognize that they're purposely doing that, or they do it implicitly, where
Right.
they just, that's their gut. Their gut
Yeah.
tells them to do that. And again, another example of how the gut, one's intuition pays off. But the research shows, asking about like the lifespan of this, is that people typically, their personality doesn't change much.
Right.
And the only time it'll really change is if those positive outcomes stop being positive. They don't get that positive outcome anymore.
Right.
The reality is people do not like change. People hate change. And that's why you see a lot of people not changing, because they hate it. Okay?
Right.
And
Why do we hate change? Why is that?
Yeah, and that's a good one.
Oh, I think I'm gonna need more time.
People hate change because it means that they have to engage something new. It means that what their routine was
Yes.
is no longer sufficient.
Mm.
Something has to change. Something novel is going to happen, and I don't want to learn something new. Okay,
Yeah.
I don't want to think too hard about things. And this means that I'm going to have to learn something new, and I'm going to have to think differently, and that's scary.
Yeah.
And it puts me in a realm of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And people don't like being uncertain, and they don't like being afraid. And when they are uncertain and afraid, they act in very strange ways.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So how do you think fear, for example, impairs our ability to think critically and have clarity about an issue we're reflecting on?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's fear, can be akin to, our emotional responding. And I always say that emotion is the number one enemy of critical thinking. And by emotion, I mean one's bias. If you feel something very strongly about a topic, that is going to cloud your judgment regarding that topic. You see, that's why the subjectivity is very, very problematic. Well, in my experience, this is how I feel. Well, no one cares, and it doesn't matter about your experience or how you feel. It's about what we can show as evidence. We need the objective. So keep the emotion out and keep the objectivity in.
And how do we become objective about something that we're passionate about?
Yeah, and that is a contradiction, and it's a contradiction that I've written about, okay? So we should only be thinking critically about things that we care about.
Right.
But then I said, emotion is the enemy of critical thinking.
Yeah.
And surely care and emotion go hand in hand. And they do to a certain extent. But we've got to say to ourselves that there's a difference between being emotionally overrun and being passionate about something to the extent that this is kind of weird and kind of cliche, but I'm going to throw this out there for a minute. It's like the idea when you say you love something and you love it so much that you're willing to see it, go away, and then hoping that it'll come. But you love it so much that you want to see it prosper even at your own detriment. That's the best way of looking. You love it so much, you want it to prosper even at your own detriment. So I'm so passionate about this topic. I care about it so much that I'm willing to be wrong so that we can come to the truth about it.
Right.
That's the subtle difference. A lot of people don't acknowledge that.
Right.
So if you're emotional about something, but you're not willing to be wrong, or you're not willing to address the uncertainty, you're not going to think critically about it.
And is that personality then? So, for example, I'm willing.
No, I don't think so.
For the most part, I love actually to be wrong about something. I like being taught to think differently about something. But I've noticed not everybody feels like that. There are some people who see certain thing and they just want it to be that, regardless of the fact that objective facts or, point differently. So what is that? Can we understand what it is in others that makes them like that?
Yeah. So what you described there, right, tells me that you have a very strong disposition towards critical thinking.
Oh, okay.
You have a strong disposition. You're happy to be wrong. You like learning new things, which means you want to get to the truth about things. And because you're happy to be wrong, you're acknowledging uncertainty, and that's half the battle. Like I said, critical thinking is about skills and disposition together. It seems you have the disposition, right? Now, here's the very, very tricky thing. I said earlier, I was like, it's not really a critical thinking, a good critical thinking or bad. You either do it or you don't kind of thing, right? But here's the tricky thing about it again is that, let's say, we'll take me, for example, right? I know a lot about critical thinking. It's my research area, we'll take that for granted. Do I think critically? I'd like to think most of the time, yes.
Yeah.
But I can tell you there are times that I fail to think critically.
Yeah.
When I'm tired, when I'm aggravated,
yes.
when I'm very, very emotionally attached to an idea.
Yeah.
I'm resistant to let go of that.
And what makes us emotionally then attached to ideas? Because we can always understand, okay, I'm tired, I'm angry, I haven't had food, and that's why I'm feeling ratty right now. But what is it that makes us, for example, attached to an idea? I think it's fear, but is there other things?
Yeah, but it's much like what we were saying before, and you're I think partially right about the fear thing, because it comes back to this idea of change. Because if we are so attached to a belief, that belief might be with us for 20, 30, 40 years. If someone tells us that that belief is wrong and that they have evidence, it's kind of like in the Matrix, take the blue pill or the red pill,
Yes.
I have evidence here. Yeah, I have evidence here that your belief is wrong.
Yeah.
Some people will go, that's amazing. I can't wait to see this. This is like, it's paradigm shifting. It's amazing. Other people will go, no. Because if you
actually, I changed my mind. I don't think I would say that. I don't think I would say that I would take the red pill. If I'm honest, I probably would have been the guy that goes back in and says, it depends. So I'm happy to be wrong about good, positive things that I was previously feeling negative about. But if you're about to tell me that actually the truth is dystopian, then I don't want to know that truth.
well, who knows? Who knows? And that's the thing. We can't see into the future either. Do you know what I mean? So when people are going, this is going to happen and then this is going to happen, I would automatically say, you can't say that. And I doubt your perspective is true, because if you can tell me you see into the future, then something's amiss, especially without doing statistical likelihoods and model building on it, but the idea is, it's a simple one, is that if you say to someone, here's evidence that your belief is wrong, and you read that, and now you see, oh, I've been wrong, that requires you to change a mindset.
Yeah.
And that's tough, because imagine you have built your entire, I was going to say life,
brand, even
not life, but an entire identity around a set of beliefs.
Yes.
And you find out something that's altering, that's life altering, that's how you engage life. And people don't want to do that because people don't like change. But to answer your question from before.
But also, sorry, can I just tell you, but could it be also because they're scared that they've wasted their life? So, for example, I interviewed a lady who did a film about a group of people who are following a preacher in America who had predicted that the world would end in 2011. And if you've invested, quit your job, you've invested so much in that, it you don't want to abandon that because you had prepared that, life beyond 2011 was not worth living.
Yeah.
So, if you've spent 60 years of your life following a certain set of rules, isn't it? It's more than that, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's so. I call that being, I draw a poker reference here. I call that being pot committed. That you've put so much time, resources, everything into this that you're as well see it through. Because if I pull from it, what's going to happen? And that's what we call in psychology. It's akin to the gambler's fallacy.
Yes.
Is that it? If we put enough into it, and that we'll get something. This pot commitment. It's part of the gambler's fallacy, and yeah, it's tough. It's tough, and that again, you don't want to pull from that for least of all reasons to save face. But then it's like, who am I? You could be you're saying 65 years. I'm 65 years old, and I don't have an identity.
Yeah. What are you supposed to do?
What are you supposed? Is it? But here's the thing: are you better to be happy or be right?
Well, that's a good question. Let's leave it at that. I'm going to pick up on
that.
I use Canva for all my design needs. I use it to create posters, flyers, and invitations. You can also create amazing business presentations and really cool social media posts, including Reels. Click on partner.canva.com/Sophia to try Canva for free. So, Chris, can we focus on that question?
Sure.
What is it about us that wants to be right than happy, whether that's in an argument with your spouse or in a family situation? Everybody has a set of ideas that they've invested their entire sense of self with. Let's say, for example, you are a stockbroker and you really believe these stocks are, crypto or whatever, it's going to deliver. Maybe somebody's just told you, look, it's about to shift, but you have built an entire life being top guy. I'm the crypto guy. I'm the crypto king. You've created an Instagram where you're crypto king. And then now people are challenging you and saying, actually, you were wrong. And it's all about to crash. What in their brain or what in our brains will make us think, you know what, I'm still going to push this thing, which is a thing that gamblers do. What is that?
Yeah, well, it's actually two different things fighting each other, which is kind of amazing, okay? So we have something called risk aversion, okay? People love to be right. They love to be right. But there's one thing that they hate more than they love being right. They hate being wrong more.
Okay.
So if you think back to school and a teacher would ask a question, you'd see a few hands go up.
Yeah.
And generally, they were very enthusiastic hands.
Mm-hmm.
And that's generally because the person knew they were right.
Yes.
So they'd raise their hand. Less often would you see hands go up and answer wrong. Because if a person didn't know, they're inclined to not make a fool of themselves, quote unquote, and stay quiet because they don't want to be perceived as being wrong.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, we are averse to risk. So when we hear that something is a good bet, we're still very worrisome about it because we don't want to lose. And then we start looking, how much could I win relative to how much could I? And then it becomes all these, kind of thinking and then intuitions. And then some people will pull out pens and pads and start doing the maths. Now, then it comes down to the other end when we look at things like gambling and pot commitment, as I call it, that we've put in so much time and effort.
Yes.
Why would we change? Now, the big question is, what do we have to lose? What do we have to lose? So if it turns out that I'm living in this cult, for the sake of argument, and I've been doing so for 65 years, and no one's asked for a suicide pact yet,
Mm-hmm.
there's a very good chance that I'm going to stick with it
Mm.
because this is all I know.
Mm.
This is
So
my
you'll
life.
choose the certainty of what you know. Wow.
Some people, but I'm not saying I would necessarily. I'm saying that
Yeah.
there is this tendency towards it because they're looking at the consequences. If
Mm.
nothing is going to definitely happen to me that's bad,
Yeah.
I'll stick with it. Now, here's the other thing, right? That's what, arguably, that's what in a cult, like we got to take into account brainwashing and stuff like that. That's the normal person off the street. If you're not having something like that, it's fine. But imagine people who are in it and do enter into a suicide pact. They're going 100% with a belief structure
Hmm.
and using that over what we would take for granted as logic.
Right.
Why? Well, it's part of their beliefs. And sometimes for some people, depending on how invested they are, they will go with their beliefs over logic.
Right.
Now, because you're a person who values logic, you think that's absolutely ridiculous.
But do you think we all value logic all the time? So, for example, everything that you're describing about the cult, I could apply that to myself in the sense that maybe, I have these ways, these cultish ways about other areas of my life,
Mm-hmm.
And so unless we're always looking at someone else and seeing how is it that applies to me, because I find almost everything, it's that Maya Angelou quote of whatever another human being is capable of, you are as well. And, I hate to think that that applies to everything because there are certain things that for me are just so abhorrent. But let's say that's the case. So you could feel that way about crypto. You could feel that way about any aspect or even a business that you are, again, invested in. Let's say yourself, you're a psychologist and I am a podcaster. And if I continue to do this for 20 years and maybe initially it was rewarding, but maybe in 10 years, somebody says to me, hey, you know what? They are offering a free coding lesson. And immediately I would think, yeah, well, I wasn't, great at maths when I was a child. I don't have this skill and I don't have that skill. Instead of being open and thinking, okay, this avenue has now closed. Should I now look at new skills? And I'm just saying, are we not cultish in other ways about our lives?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the thing is that there's two ways you can look at logic, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm using logic as in a mathematical sort of way, okay? Mm-hmm. If A, then B, or if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, we can think of it that way, right? And it's much easier for you and I to apply that to, say, our cult setting, right? Yeah. Because we're not part of that cult.
Yeah.
And we're making a judgment about it. And here we are saying, because we've never been in a suicide pact before, how could someone enter into a suicide pact?
Yes.
But then we look at different avenues about our life. And I really like the way you describe that, where you're saying, I can be cultish about certain aspects of my life, right? Mm. You're going to use a logic that isn't an objective logic. You're going to use a logic that suits you. And what I mean by that is we rationalize decisions for ourselves all of the time. Why do we do bad things sometimes? Why do we make mistakes?
Yeah.
Because we've rationalized them in such a way that benefits us in terms of what we want.
Mm.
So I say this to my students because, just knowing the nature of students and I get a laugh out of them. I say, let's say you have your last class, your last lecture is at 3:00 or at 2:00. So it ends at 3:00 on a Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
And one of your classmates says, hey, let's go to the college bar.
Yeah.
It'll be good. Well, it's 3:00 in the day.
Yeah.
Oh, don't worry about it. We'll only go for 1 or 2. And if we only go for, even if we stay for longer, we don't have class tomorrow until Oh, I don't know. We have that, we have that term paper due next week. Oh, we can write that on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We have the whole weekend to. So what's happening is we know deep down, we know it's probably not the best decision, but
Yeah.
because we want to do it,
Yeah.
we will find a logic that works for us to allow us to do what we want.
This is perfect. So then now let's talk about desire.
Okay.
So when I look at, we live in a society where religion is really, people are so wary of religion. But religion played an important role in curbing some of our desires that were, everybody used to agree some desires are low based desires, and some are to be admired. And so if you look at some of those impulses and those desires, how can we avoid, how can we make the right desires that are calling us to higher and those that are pulling us and set our lives completely off course, and sometimes maybe even lead to criminal behavior?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So like, I mean, when you talk about desire, when you describe it, it's a very emotion-based concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
I want this. I want this so much, and
Yes.
I'm willing to do whatever for it.
Yeah. Where does that come from for each person?
That's based on belief, emotion, experience, right? It's all influencing this idea, this concept, okay? What is desire? It's certainly not objective, because what you desire and what I desire may not necessarily be the same thing.
But
So
do we want the same thing? So, for example, the person who's going to the gym is looking for the same feeling of certainty, growth, versus the same probably for the person who's going to a pub or doing drugs, right? They're all looking for a way to just feel a bit more certain, to feel a bit more sure about their life, but they've gone about it differently. Or is that not the same?
I don't think it's the same. I think the guy who goes to the gym has a desire to be healthy and look good. If he's having fun doing it, okay, fair enough. And I know people who go to the gym on the regular basis who enjoy it. I know people who go to the gym on a regular basis who do not enjoy it. I know people who go to the pub once in a blue moon and enjoy it. And I know people who go to the pub far too often and enjoy it.
But do these two activities both meet the same needs, or are they meeting different needs?
It depends. And that's the thing. If you're going to the gym because you enjoy it, it's the same as going to the pub to enjoy it, because you're getting enjoyment out of it. But if you're going to the gym because you desire to look good, that's going to be different than why people go to the pub.
Yeah.
Or alternatively, maybe people are going to the pub to dress up and look good. And then
for social.
Exactly. And then in which case going to the pub is more about showcasing yourself. So if you're the type of person who goes to the pub just to take photos and post them on Instagram, you can make that same argument for the person in the gym in that context.
Yeah.
But what brings them together? What's the underlying similarity?
Yeah.
Is the design. But everyone does things for different reasons.
Yeah.
So that's where your point about desire comes in. What is their goal? What is their desire from this? What are they trying to achieve from this?
Yeah. Because if I look at our society and the underlying factors that, what we're trying to talk about with this whole podcast is really to understand how we can apply critical thinking in our own lives to our benefit, right? And so then if you think of what are the things we're all trying to meet in our own lives, we all want certain things, right? We all want love, we all want connection, we all want to feel like we're contributing and we are significant and we're important. So if we assume those are all the human needs, but then you look at how our desires are sometimes hampering our ability to meet those needs. That's what I was thinking. How can we use critical thinking to help us instead of hurt us and avoid the things that hurt us?
Yeah, so I think what ties those two together in an important way is self-evaluation. So for the past little while, I've been talking about self-evaluation in terms of reflective judgment, taking a step back, thinking about, why do I believe this? Could I be wrong? How certain can I actually be about this?
Yeah.
Well, we have to apply that in terms of our own wants, desires, and goals. We need to apply self-evaluation. We have to be honest with ourselves that we're not perfect.
Yeah.
We have to identify character flaws from time to time. We have to be honest with ourselves about what we're doing right, and that we're trying our best. There's a happy medium in that self-evaluation, in the sense that we're always going to be, for the most part, positive towards ourselves. For the most part, we're going to be biased in favor of who we are, what we're about.
Right.
Sometimes that's not the case, though. So you might have this perspective of who you want to be. And this might be your desire, your goal, your motivation. I want to be this person. But when you're real about yourself, you're actually here. Now, this isn't technically unhealthy.
Yeah.
Okay? What it is you are creating a model for what you want to be, what you strive to be.
Yeah.
And that's motivation. And that's good. It's nice to have a drive for self-improvement.
Okay.
But if you're too far away, this can be very bad for self-esteem, the way we look at ourselves. We might, instead of being biased in favor of ourselves, we might be biased against ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm ugly, I'm fat, I'm poor, I'm stupid.
Yeah.
Then on the other hand, you might have someone who is very unrealistic about who they actually are. And we sometimes talk about people like that. They haven't got a clue, or they have notions.
Yeah.
It's about finding this happy threshold of the ideal self and the actual self.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
And so we have to be honest with ourselves. And that's very difficult for people to do, being honest with themselves. Because we like to dress things up in a certain way where we look good, and where we're happy with it. Like, I mean, we can actually see this in practice with Instagram, with Facebook, with everything. We take these photos of ourselves, we delete the ones where we think we look ugly.
Yes.
Even though they may look exactly like, or that's how people would see us.
Yeah.
We apply filters. Like, I mean,
absolutely.
And our eyes are a little bit bigger, and our smile is a little bit bigger, and our teeth are a little bit wider, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We are producing a representation of who we are.
Yes.
But that representation may not be accurate. It is a representation of who we ideally want to be.
Yeah.
So if we're honest with who we are, and we're honest with who we want to be, this is healthy, because we can make steps towards achieving that in an adaptive kind of way.
Yeah.
Fortunately, when people aren't necessarily or when people aren't completely honest with themselves about one or the other or both, the way in which they try to achieve isn't as adaptive as it could be. It could be maladaptive. And then you see we'll say odd behavior. No, we won't say odd behaviors, because they aren't actually odd. We see people, we'll say negative behaviors, maladaptive behaviors. We see people engaging in these all of the time. But it's how we go about achieving our goals, desires, what have you. In line with that is, how we cope with things. Something doesn't go our way. It is blocking us from our goal.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that? How do we cope? And people, like, I mean, you look at COVID. COVID is a great example of people and coping strategies. You've got this lockdown where you're telling people they can't leave their houses. you've got people, okay, fine. Some people live at home with five other people. There is a certain social element. Yeah, people will get on each other's nerves and wish they could go out. But then what about poor people who were stuck all alone by themselves with
Yeah.
no roommates, housemates, or family? There's different levels of coping necessary. And, one of the most, it's weird, but, I get away with weird things because, I'm in psychological research, but I find it so interesting to listen to people talking about what they did during COVID, because it's essentially, part of a coping strategy. I heard a lot of people went out, well, they didn't go out, but they ordered sheds. They had sheds delivered. And I was like, you bought a shed. What did you do with your shed? Put it out the back garden, and we built a gym, a small little gym, so that I could keep healthy, work out. Cool, brilliant, adaptive. That is positive coping.
Yeah.
People would go for long walks. They would socially distance, but they'd go for long walks. And, they found that it was good for them. Fresh air, kept healthy. Good, positive coping strategy. Some people were drinking a bottle of wine a day. It worked. They didn't develop a drinking problem. They came out the other side well, and we're thankful for that. A lot of people did that. Not the healthiest. Not the healthiest coping strategy, but a coping strategy nonetheless. And that's what I mean by maladaptive. You're not getting anything from it. I know a lot of men around my age did this, and I was surprised because it was one of these weird things where a man my age, a lot of people would be very hesitant to admit this stuff. But I found it so interesting that a lot of people did the same thing. And some people described it, and before I tell you what it is, some people described it in a quote unquote negative way. The wording they use, and the wording is interesting. They're like, you regressed. And I was like, well, that's a very Freudian way. And, I'm, modern psychologists, we're not big fans of Freud. So when we hear things in Freud speak, we go, what? And we look at it in a negative way. We go, you regressed to your childhood. I said, well, that's one way of looking at it. But what we did was, what I did anyways, is I thought about the things that I enjoyed when I was younger. And I enjoyed Batman comics when I was younger. Batman's a big thing now with films and everything. And I was like, you know what? I was going through old boxes, and I saw an old Batman comic and found it. And I was like, I wonder what Batman's doing now in 2021, 2020, whatever it was. And I picked up a comic, and I started reading them. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and started reading them. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't tell anyone this is weird,
Nostalgia, basically, right?
Pardon?
It was a nostalgic time for you. You went back to your happy time.
That's it. Nostalgia.
Actually, I think I did the same.
Yeah, nostalgia. It's a big, big thing. And I found, for a lot of people my age, that's what they kind of did. And yes, we went to a time when we were vulnerable, when we were children, because we're vulnerable now, because we were living in this time of uncertainty, but we were comfortable. We were protected. This was a safe time. This was the best time, arguably, when we were kids and we didn't have a care in the world.
Right.
Very, very comforting, very, very supportive. And I realized, when I was in the middle of it, I was like, this is kind of strange, whatever. And, my wife was like, it's a little strange, Chris, I'll be honest with you, but you do you. If you're happy with doing it, you're not losing your mind going out, going places where you shouldn't.
There's worse things than reading a comic book that reminds you of your childhood, right?
Exactly. Like she goes, you can be doing. She goes, you know what? I'm happy you're doing that. You do you. Keep going with it. And when we came out the other end of lockdown, I realized that it's the nostalgia. Yeah, it was the support of knowing that this is eliciting some kind of happy memory of comfort and safety. And I said, this is just a coping mechanism. That's what it is. And then when I was talking about it as such, just as you just said, a lot of people were like, yeah, I engaged a lot of nostalgia during that time. And it does. It brings us so...
The happy music that you listen to in your teenage years. For me, it was a lot of boy bands, actually.
Yeah. So this is adaptive as opposed to maladaptive. So when we're trying to achieve our goals, our desires, this is a good, positive thing if we do it in an adaptive fashion.
Yeah.
But if we go about it in negative ways, it's
and some desires. So, for example, one of the things let's say, for example, somebody has a desire to be a womanizer.
Yeah.
You know, isn't that, for example, sort of desire detrimental to your health? And for example, we all want social connection, and unless you work hard and invest your life in certain ways, instead of being, let's say, giving into I'm scared of commitment, or just constantly looking for unfulfilling relationships, that kind of thing. All desires are not equal, right?
Right.
So, for example, what have you found out about personality? Do you think it's that avoidant personality that makes us desire certain things that maybe are not compatible with what our actual needs are?
Well, this is one of those things where it comes down to, unfortunately, it comes down to each and every person, because desires are not equal, as you said. So if you've got someone who's womanizing, my question would become, how old is that person? Is that person attached or supposed to be attached
in their 40s, maybe in their 40s, 50s, and just is not really thinking beyond their age, and that applies to women too. I'm just saying, like, there are different types of desires or impulses that really we can give into, but maybe our need for love and connection requires us to adopt new, disciplined, and commitment friendly options. But so many of our desires come from culture, from TV, where certain aspects are glorified, right? Certain things, certain behaviors are glorified. And those sometimes are directly in conflict with the things that we know make human beings happy and loving and able to engage with one another in relationship.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, so what you're describing there is something we call cognitive dissonance.
Okay.
So cognitive dissonance is where we believe one thing, but we act in opposition to it. So it's kind of like my story about the students midweek drinking. If you're coerced into it, you shouldn't be doing it, but you're doing it anyways. And what makes it even worse is you might have been actually giving out about people who do that, quite recently. And it makes it even worse. It goes, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing what I was just, putting down quite recently. And then it's like, oh my God, I hope no one sees me. And we do this anyway.
Yeah. But why do we engage in it when we're sober? I mean, obviously, if we've had a bit to drink, I understand. If somebody has had something to drink, their judgment is impaired.
Of course,
but when you're sober, let's say that person, you're in a work environment, you haven't had anything to drink, you shouldn't behave this way with this coworker, and that this.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
Then what makes? I mean, you see it even celebrities doing this, where their impulses force them to behave in ways that they know is either going to destroy their career. They're obviously extreme versions. Like when you look at someone like Harvey Weinstein, you're famous and you're acting the way you're acting.
Yeah, well, there are 101 different answers for that, depending on who the person is. So if we take a look at it, you might have someone who says they do it because they have the power to do it.
Yes.
Okay. So by doing it isn't for any kind of sexual reason necessarily, but just as a kind of a show of, or an evidence of this power.
Yeah.
It could be the case that someone really likes sex. That they might be a sex addict. They might be whatever. There might be a case where someone engages it because they feel so poorly about themselves that they're amazed that someone's even flirting with them.
Right.
And because they're flirting with me, they make me feel good about myself.
Right.
And because of that, this is why I want to engage with them, because they're making me feel good about it. So the thing is, why do they engage in this behavior? Why do we engage in any type of romantic or sexual behavior?
Yeah.
What's different, what I think is different here is it seems like you're saying that something's on the line, particularly in the job setting, right? Something's on the line. You could lose your job over something like this, and
you could lose your job, your marriage, everything.
Absolutely. And there you go. If you're married, you could potentially lose. But then, I guess
how does someone rationalize that? They won't know, the colleagues won't know, the wife won't know. Is it just as simple as that, as basic as that? How is their critical thinking?
But they rationalize it. Again, they use that flawed logic. They think they're using logic. They think they're using accurate logic, but they're using a logic that facilitates what they want.
Okay.
So what they want is, as it turns out, is to sleep with this person. That's what they want. Now they're thinking in terms of an immediate. Now there's a lot of research into the point that I'm getting to, but it's about, is it about willpower? Yeah, it's a little bit about willpower. It's a little bit about self-regulation, and that's an important part of critical thinking as well. So they did this study many years ago, and it's a cute, lovely story, and you can actually find it online. And I'd say most people have seen a version of it online, a video where they put a marshmallow in front of a toddler.
Yeah.
They say to the toddler, listen, you have an option here. You can eat that marshmallow now.
Yeah.
Or you can wait 10 minutes and I will give you 2 marshmallows. Mm-hmm. What does the toddler do?
Mm-hmm. He wants to eat it now. I guess it's the impulse control aspect, right?
Yep.
So then how much of it is, one, self-image? First of all, another thing I want to talk about is self-image. So for example, somebody has an image in their head. I am not a womanizer. I would never cheat on my husband. Or even better, they have a moral self-image. They are a pastor, an imam. And yet they will take the chance and engage in something that could cause them scandal. Can it be explained simply as a lack of impulse control?
Well, how happy are they in their marriage? How happy are they in their role? Is it something that they're trying to self-sabotage? Is it, it depends. And really, and I keep saying it depends, and I hate saying it depends because I'd love to give you a very straightforward answer. But
no, I love that. Yeah. All of the things that you're saying then suggest that human
it could
beings
be any of these, and it's such a simple thing. It's a story we've heard a million times, and that's why it's so frustrating. I guess it's a story we've heard a million times, but every time we hear it, there's different motivations and different reasons for it. It all depends on the person that's doing it.
I hadn't thought of self-sabotage, that the person might not be happy in that role and just wants out of that role, and so they sabotage it and just give in. Because they feel like I have nothing to lose. I don't really value this so-called thing. So it just shows you basically that, then would you say that person has thought critically about their situation, feels trapped, and has thought actually this is aware that this will get them out of it? Or
I don't think so, because I think that would be kind of, I think self-sabotage is a very and self-sabotage can happen in a number of ways. Like say for instance, someone going on a job interview. That's actually my favorite example of self-sabotage. You can under-prepare for this job interview because you don't really want this particular job, but you feel obligated to go on the interview. Yeah. And so you do really poorly, and you say to yourself, oh, well,
I tried.
I guess I didn't prepare well enough, but you put yourself into the position where you weren't going to do very well because you didn't. So I think there's an implicitness to it, because we don't always know we're doing it. So there is that, sometimes we make a decision and we say, I have no bias, absolutely zero bias in my decision making here, and I am 100% objective. That's not true. There's always a little bit of bias, no matter how much we control for it. So as critical thinkers, we try our best to minimize that bias as much as possible. But even when we're trying our hardest to do it, that little bit of bias that we still have, that's implicit. And
Okay.
that's what I mean by an implicit cognition or in implicit behavior. There's something at work in that self-sabotage that is implicit. And so I don't think it's necessarily critical thinking.
Yeah. Is it self-awareness? How important is self-awareness for critical thinking?
It's very, very important, but there are varying degrees of self-awareness.
Okay.
There's self-awareness in the sense that I am aware of who I am, what I'm about, what I represent, all of this. But despite that, it doesn't have to have critical thinking. It can just be about the who I am, what I'm about, my emotion, my desire, my belief, my whatever. You might have a more realistic self-awareness that is about
Mm-hmm.
my thinking, my uncertainty, my acknowledgement that I could be wrong. Again, it comes back to this ideal version and an actual version.
Mm. How do
Which
we
one?
form that ideal version of ourselves? How does that even come to? Is it our ego? Is that our ego, the ideal version?
It might be, but then what's ego?
Is
What's ego?
ego, there's a
Ego
definition
is
I
just a label
had.
that ego is just a word that we've used now for some kind of abstract thought process of, well, all it is it's our culture, it's our experience, it's our thoughts, it's our beliefs, it's our attitudes, it's all of these things that play that make us quote unquote who we are.
Is
Why?
there, but what is the real, because I'm always trying to think this for myself, is, somebody said, like if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, is what is the highest self that I can be? Let's say you give yourself values, like I would love to be more compassionate, more patient, more successful at things that are important to me. But then you realize, actually, I don't know what's important to me because I am a person of my time and space, and some of the things that aren't really important to me, I've come to believe are. And so, how much self-awareness can we ever have, really?
We can never, but that's it. We can never be fully self-aware. And I'm gonna bring us back to gonna bring us back to an idea that we introduced earlier, right? And kind of subvert it a little, okay? We hate change and we avoid change, but we change quite a bit, but we do so implicitly. We
Oh,
engage change when we're unaware it's happening.
right.
Okay, so you're 46 now. I would bet you any amount of money that you were a lot different when you were 23.
In some ways, yeah, I was very like I was less logical. I think I just would. I had an idealized version of the world. I thought everybody was always right. Everybody was exactly like me about everything. And so, yeah, definitely, life has taught me to also look critically at myself and see all of the ways in which I'm not perfect. And so realize, oh, I used to think I'm patient, but actually I'm impatient in these moments. And so I actually have spent, I think, in the last, since 20 to this age, I'm constantly thinking of all the ways I'm not what I thought I was, and how can I become better. But even that better, I don't know what that
Well, you
means.
see, that's the thing. So it sounds like you've become more mature, you become more responsible, you're more willing to self-evaluate, you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking harder about what you want to achieve.
Yeah,
This sounds like a positive change, positive movement, positive progression, positive development.
yeah. But I also realize in some ways there's so many other habits that you pick up that I pick up that are actually habits that maybe when I was 20, because I had a clear right and wrong line, that I wouldn't have picked up. And so definitely, yeah, I find that you're right. You change, but you change subtly because you question
Hmm.
other ways that you've been previously.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. Where I look at myself, I'm 38. I'm a lot different to how I was, I would say when I was 26. And it's not because someone said to me, you have to change or whatever. It's just as I stand in one space. Just imagine yourself standing there,
Mhm.
and everything around you is moving around.
Mhm.
Things change for you,
Mm.
and you're not necessarily aware of them. Because if I told you you had to change, you'd be like, nope, I'm not changing. I'm afraid of change. I don't want change.
Mm.
But as things change around you, your situation changes. You've had to change without ever really recognizing. So I was one day, at one time I was 21 and single. I'm 38 and I'm married. And I have 2 kids. My perspective on life is very, very different. I have different responsibilities. I have different outlooks. I have different desires for the future. I want the world to be different than how I wanted it to be when I was 21. My vision has changed, not because
So
of
we're always changing, whether we want to admit it or not, right?
exactly, exactly. So
I could literally talk to you forever, and we're gonna have to do this again.
definitely, I really enjoyed myself.
I
So
really.
I'd love to come back, Sophia, anytime you want to have me.
Well, that's great. We can do like popular culture stuff and really
That'd be
get
great.
into more fun stuff too. Thank you
Brilliant. Yeah,
so
yeah.
much, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.
I use Canva for all my design needs. I use it to create posters, flyers, and invitations. You can also create amazing business presentations and really cool social media posts, including reels. Click on partner.canva.com/Sophia to try Canva for free.